I didn't say a word when they handed me that cease and desist order. I just slid my 1986 utility easement deed across the table and watched 40 McMansions lose power to their infinity pools. The Pinehurst Gardens HOA thought they could steal my solar array while I was caring for my dying father. These entitled bureaucrats built their perfect suburban paradise on my grandfather's land, complete with golf cart Karens patrolling with clipboards. What they didn't know, I'm a master electrician. And that little transformer station on my property had been waiting 35 years for someone stupid enough to build downstream. The audacity was truly something to behold until I threw the main breaker, and their luxury development got its first taste of darkness. All this was going to be satisfying. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, because you're about to witness the most beautiful HOA takedown involving federal utility law and basic electrical physics. Let me introduce you to Derek Sullivan, that's me. 45 years old master electrician, and the third-generation owner of 12 acres of prime Arizona desert just outside Scottsdale. My grandfather, who we all called Gramps, bought this property back in 1952, when Scottsdale was still a cowboy town. And Cactus outnumbered tech bros by about 1,000 to 1. Gramps was the kind of man who believed in self-sufficiency and clean energy long before it was trendy. In 1986, he built a small electrical substation on our property. Nothing fancy, just good engineering designed to step down high-voltage power for our home and workshop. Arizona Public Service even helped him with the design. Gramps always said that someday renewable energy would be the future. But for now, it was just him and his windmill charging batteries for the water pump. Then came my father's Alzheimer's diagnosis, where I spent 3 years managing his care and maintaining our off-grid homestead while I was focused on hospice care. Gramps passed away, and the property went into a family trust managed by my well-meaning but overwhelmed cousin Jenny, who lives in Seattle and knows about as much about Arizona property law as I know about rainforests. She hired a local property management company called Desert Land Services to handle the taxes and upkeep. The property taxes got paid automatically. But here's the thing. Jenny never actually looked at the utility easement agreements. Big mistake. Enter our villain, Patricia Pat Rodriguez. 49 years old, president of Pinehurst Gardens HOA, and the kind of woman who drives a white Tesla Model X and treats yoga pants like business attire. Patty's got that particular brand of entitled environmentalism that wealthy suburbanites perfect around age 45. You know, the kind where they'll install solar panels while demanding their neighbors remove theirs. Patty's married to City Councilman David Rodriguez, which should tell you everything you need to know about how she gets things done. She's got a reputation for sustainable living initiatives, which is fancy talk for forcing out anyone who doesn't fit her vision of eco-luxury. The smell of her expensive essential oils can't quite mask the stench of hypocrisy and privilege that follows her around like a cloud. I came home from the funeral home in March 2024, ready to finally install the solar array Gramps had always planned. Drove down that familiar gravel road past the old saguaro, where I'd built my first treehouse, expecting to see the same desert landscape and that little substation humming quietly in the Arizona sun. Instead, I found construction crews, concrete trucks, and survey stakes scattered across my back 12 like some kind of suburban invasion. The crunch of caliche under my boots felt different somehow, angrier. I could taste the dust and my own rising fury as I marched up to the construction foreman. "Sorry, buddy," he said, not looking sorry at all. "We got permits and everything. This is Pinehurst Gardens property now." I called. The police officer Martinez showed up and explained with obvious discomfort that the HOA had filed an adverse possession claim while I was dealing with Dad's illness, apparently, when nobody's actively using land for a certain period. And if you can prove you've been improving it, you can sometimes claim ownership. That's when Pat appeared gliding up in her silent Tesla like some kind of eco-warrior princess. Her voice had that California transplant sweetness that immediately made me want to check my wallet. "Your family abandoned this land, honey," she said, smiling like she was saving the planet. "We're just putting it to sustainable use for the community." But here's what really got my blood boiling. I discovered that her construction crews had cut the main power line that fed my substation. The electricity was dead every single day, and with it 35 years of careful electrical infrastructure that had powered our homestead through brownouts, blackouts, and everything in between. As I stood there watching my dead voltage meter, Pat's parting shot echoed in my ears. "You should have stayed closer to home, cowboy." That's when I knew this wasn't just about land, it was war. I hired the first attorney I could find. Big mistake. This guy quoted me $25,000 just to challenge the adverse possession claim. Turns out while I was watching Dad fade away, Pat, his husband David, had pushed through an emergency zoning modification. My family's land went from agricultural preservation to residential development zone faster than you can say conflict of interest. But here's where my master electrician training came in handy. While that overpriced lawyer was shuffling papers and billing hours, I was digging through the utility company records like I was hunting for a short circuit, and just like troubleshooting electrical problems, the devil was in the details. I found Gramps' original 1986 substation permits, and they were beautiful. See, Gramps didn't just build that transformer himself. He worked directly with Arizona Public Service for grid connection and emergency backup that meant federal utility jurisdiction. And here's your first knowledge nugget. Any substation built with utility company cooperation creates federal jurisdiction that local hosts can't override, period. The metallic taste of adrenaline hit my tongue as I realized what I'd found. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. It was a federal utility case. But wait, it gets better. While I was photocopying permits at the utility office, I stumbled across a 1952 utility easement deed buried in the old records. My great-grandfather had purchased exclusive electrical rights to the entire Desert Ridge watershed. These rights were older than the city, older than the county's electrical grid, older than every single one of those McMansions sitting on my land. They weren't just stealing my property, they were stealing my power. Meanwhile, Pat was busy playing the environmental hero. She organized an emergency HOA meeting about dangerous electrical infrastructure, complete with a local news crew she'd obviously tipped off in advance. I watched her on the evening news, standing in front of her perfectly manicured xeriscaped lawn, talking about children's safety and sustainable development. "We're just concerned about outdated electrical systems," she said, dabbing at her eyes with organic cotton tissue. "That substation looks ready to fail, and we have families living right downstream." The funny thing about local news is they love a good story. But they're not always great with follow-up research. If they'd bothered to check, they would have found that my substation had passed its most recent safety inspection with flying colors. But Pat wasn't done. She posted on the Nextdoor app. You know, that digital neighborhood watch where HOA presidents go to flex their petty authority. Her post warned about dangerous electrical hazards and unstable individuals in the area. She never mentioned my name, but she didn't have to in a community that small. Everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with sage pollen hung heavy in the March air as I stood on my front porch each evening watching their construction crews work double shifts. They were racing to finish those houses before I could get any kind of legal injunction every night. I counted new foundation pours every night. The power to my substation stayed dead. That's when I called my old union buddy Carlos Martinez, who now works for the Public Utilities Commission. 20 minutes. On the phone with Carlos taught me more about utility law than 3 hours with that expensive attorney. Derek Carlos said, if they're cutting utility infrastructure without federal permits, that's a Public Utilities Regulatory Policy Act violation. And if your substation has federal easements, he didn't need to finish the sentence. I started documenting everything: trail cameras around the property perimeter, time-stamped photos of every severed power line flow, measurements at 3 different points along the electrical grid. My cousin Jenny called from Seattle, begging me to just take the money and walk away. But this wasn't about money anymore. It was about the crunch of gravel under construction boots that had no business being on my land. It was about the sound of Patty's Tesla doors closing during zoning hearings that should never have happened. It was about the bitter taste of courthouse coffee during research sessions that revealed just how deep this corruption went. But most of all, it was about that substation. Gramps built it to provide reliable, clean power for our homestead. For 35 years, It had been a source of independence. For our family, Pat's crew was turning it into a decorative garden accent for McMansions. Here's the thing about utility rights in Arizona. They're older than water rights, older than mineral rights, and a hell of a lot harder to steal, but you have to know how to fight for them. As I stood there watching another concrete truck rumble past my kitchen window, I realized something important. This wasn't going to be won in a courtroom with expensive lawyers and legal briefs. This was going to be won with engineering. Pat decided to turn up the heat. She organized what she called a neighborhood safety patrol. 3 HOA board members in matching polo shirts who parked at my property entrance like some kind of suburban checkpoint. They photographed every visitor, wrote down license plates, and filed reports with the sheriff about suspicious electrical activity. The harassment campaign was textbook intimidation noise complaints. When I ran my generator during evening maintenance, unsightly structures citations for my perfectly functional workshop that had been standing since 1962, fire hazards reports about my battery bank that had passed inspection just 4 months earlier. But the real kick in the teeth came when David used his city council position to order a wellness check on me through Adult Protective Services. Apparently, I was a troubled widower who might be struggling with isolation issues. The social worker who showed up was apologetic but thorough. She had to check boxes on her clipboard while Pat watched from her Tesla, like she was supervising a mental health evaluation. That's when the coordinated bureaucratic assault began. Building inspector, fire marshal, health department, and code enforcement all showed up on the same day like some kind of regulatory SWAT team. Each one found minor violations requiring expensive corrections. The building inspector, who happened to be a yoga buddy of Pat, he's declared that my electrical panel needed $12,000 in upgrades to meet current code. I recognized the squeeze play immediately. It's the same tactic they use in construction disputes to pressure contractors, overwhelm them with bureaucracy until they give up and walk away. But 2 can play that game while they were drowning me in paperwork. I was making some phone calls of my own. Carlos Martinez at the Puke was very interested to learn that Pat's HOA had never filed the required electrical impact assessment before redirecting utility infrastructure. Turns out any development that cuts existing power lines requires federal utilities clearance even on private property, and the fines for violations start at $75,000 per day. The smell of fresh concrete curing in the desert heat reminded me every morning that I was running out of time, but my research was paying off in ways Pat never expected. I discovered that their entire development had been built in what Arizona Public Service classified as a critical electrical corridor. Insurance companies had initially refused coverage until the HOA provided an electrical safety plan. Their solution: permanently divert power away from my dangerous substation and let me buy electricity from the grid like everyone else. Here's your second knowledge nugget: utility fraud in development projects often carries criminal penalties. Not just civil ones. When developers lie about electrical infrastructure to get coverage, that's federal wire fraud. The deeper I dug, the more I realized this wasn't Pat's first rodeo. Her previous HOA in California had paid a $4.7 million puck fine for an identical power line cutting scheme. She'd left town just ahead of the federal prosecutors and set up shop here in Arizona looking for new victims. Meanwhile, Pat was spreading rumors about my mental health and dangerous electrical knowledge. She hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on my union activities and organized a petition demanding the city condemn my property as a public safety hazard. "We have children playing in these neighborhoods," she told the local paper. "We can't have unstable individuals with access to high-voltage equipment." But while she was busy playing the victim, I was building alliances. I connected with other utility victims through online forums and discovered a pattern. Pat's HOA had absorbed 4 smaller properties through similar tactics over the past 2 years. Each time the story was the same: pressure, harassment, bureaucratic warfare, and mysterious electrical emergencies that always seemed to benefit David's construction company. I partnered with my elderly neighbor, Mr. Yamamoto, whose workshop had gone dark. Since the power line cuts, I met Susan Torres, whose family business had been rezoned out of existence by David Rodriguez. 18 months earlier, These weren't isolated incidents, they were part of a systematic land grab that had been going on for years. The vibration of heavy machinery through my workshop floorboards became a daily reminder of what I was fighting for. Every morning I watched concrete trucks rumble past my kitchen window. Every evening I documented the power theft that was slowly killing my electrical independence. But I was also preparing. I installed backup generators at key circuit points. I calculated the exact load requirements for restoring power, 47,000 watts worth of residential demand, that my substation could easily handle if I could just throw the right switches. The gritty texture of sand between my fingers as I tested ground connections told the story better than any lawyer could. This wasn't just theft, it was infrastructure destruction on a massive scale. And then I got the certified letter. The city was planning to seize my property through eminent domain for public safety. The hearing was scheduled in just 10 days. Pat's quote in the paper made her strategy crystal clear. Sometimes you have to protect the community from dangerous individuals. But as I stood at my workshop window that night, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon, I realized something important. Those weren't just dust storms building up, they were opportunity. Pat went nuclear. David fast-tracked an eminent domain hearing scheduled for just 10 days out. And suddenly the HOA was offering me $35,000 for property assessed at $1.2 million. The message was clear: take the low-ball offer or lose everything. The local newspaper ran a hit piece that made me sound like some kind of electrical terrorist troubled widower blocks. Green Development was the headline, complete with a photo that somehow made my workshop look like a meth lab and me look like I hadn't slept in weeks. But Pat's masterstroke was the photo op. She staged it perfectly. 25 concerned mothers holding children near my property line with a professional photographer capturing their worried faces while my electrical equipment loomed menacingly in the background. The Facebook post went viral with the hashtag, "Protect our kids, our children deserve safe neighborhoods," she told the Channel 12 news crew. Not whatever issues he brought back from electrical work. You know what she was right about? One thing. I did bring something back from electrical work. I brought back the ability to recognize when someone's trying to short-circuit you with propaganda and the technical skills to do something about it. Carlos Martinez called, with information that changed everything. The Public Utilities Commission had already opened a federal investigation into Desert Ridge power cuts based on my initial complaint. But here's the kicker. Pat's previous HOA in California faced that $4.7 million fine for the exact same scheme. Federal utility crimes follow individuals even when they move to new jurisdictions, while Pat was playing the victim on social media. I was discovering that her entire financial house of cards was built on fraud. The HOA's construction loans were tied to inflated property values, and the banks had required guaranteed electrical access for loan approval. If those utility rights reverted back to me, their rightful owner, the entire development would become financially powerless. The taste of bitter irony wasn't lost on me. They'd stolen my electricity to make their land valuable, and now their own greed was going to leave them in the dark. Pat's panic was starting to show. She offered me $75,000 cash. No questions asked, 24-hour deadline. When I refused, she flew to Seattle to approach my cousin Jenny with some sob story about her cousin's mental health issues that backfired spectacularly. Jenny might not know Arizona utility law, but she knows her family. She called me Laughing Derek, some crazy woman in yoga pants. Just offered to help with my troubled cousin. I told her if she contacts our family again, I'm calling the Federal Trade Commission. But while Pat was busy making enemies, I was making allies. I partnered with utility lawyer Amanda Chen, who specialized in pro bono infrastructure rights cases. Together, we formed a coalition with downstream residents who'd been affected by the power cuts. Mr. Yamamoto brought historical documentation showing his family had used substation power for manufacturing since 1967. Susan Torres provided photographs of her grandfather's electrical shop from the 1950s, powered by the same grid that was now feeding Pat's decorative landscape lighting. The local Sierra Club was particularly interested to learn that the power cuts had destroyed critical environmental monitoring equipment. Turns out killing protected desert wildlife, while committing utility theft tends to get federal attention real fast. During my nighttime reconnaissance old habits from electrical work, I discovered something beautiful. My substation wasn't just a simple transformer structure. The original 1986 design included an emergency isolation system with manual switches that hadn't been activated since 1998. The hollow echo of electricity flowing through those underground transmission channels during my midnight tests told me everything I needed to know. The system was still functional, and it was designed for exactly this situation: controlled power restoration to demonstrate natural electrical flow patterns. I calculated the electrical load needed to restore Desert Ridge to its original power pattern, 47,000 watts. The substation was currently capable of 52,000 watts, thanks to recent equipment upgrades. The math was perfect, but the timing had to be precise. Using my drone for aerial reconnaissance, I mapped the exact locations of those new home electrical meters relative to the original power grid. 5 houses were drawing electricity directly from my illegally tapped lines. 3 more had transformers connected below the legal connection point. Here's the beautiful part: the construction crews had installed decorative electrical boxes using residential-grade equipment. They looked pretty, but they weren't designed to handle actual industrial voltage. Meanwhile, my substation system was engineered by Arizona Public Service, specifically for load management. Then Pat made her biggest mistake. Her crew began installing permanent electrical barriers to completely block my original power lines. This would make my substation system useless and permanently destroy the neighborhood electrical grid. But it also gave me the perfect justification for what I was about to do. The Weather Service was predicting heavy April storms, perfect seasonal cover for emergency electrical maintenance. As I stood at those main switches at sunset reading Gramps' journal entry about providing reliable power during outages, the decision crystallized: time to throw the breakers. While digging through dusty utility records for the 3rd time that week, I found a misfiled document that changed everything. Buried behind a stack of 1987 building permits was the original electrical grid management covenant from Gramps' substation construction. The language was beautiful in its simplicity. Substation operators shall maintain reliable electrical service to preserve community infrastructure in perpetuity. This wasn't just permission to manage power. It was a legal obligation that superseded any HOA agreements or city ordinances. But Amanda Chen's investigation uncovered something even more damaging. The HOA's insurance applications contained flat-out lies. They'd claimed no electrical hazard risk and permanent power diversion approved by all agencies to secure $62 million in coverage. Here's your third knowledge nugget: insurance fraud in development projects often carries criminal penalties. Not just civil ones. When you lie to insurance companies about electrical risks, that's federal mail fraud with mandatory prison time. The deeper we dug, the more the whole scheme unraveled. David Rodriguez's construction company wasn't just the contractor for the HOA development. He was the primary investor. Every house built on my stolen land put money directly in his pocket. And here's the kicker: he'd never recused himself from a single city council vote that benefited his project. Carlos Martinez shared puke findings that made my blood boil. The power line cuts had destroyed the entire electrical grid for 3 small businesses, protected manufacturing operations that had thrived on reliable power for generations. Arizona Commerce Commission had documented the economic damage, but somehow the report got lost in David's office before it could trigger federal prosecution. They weren't just stealing land and electricity. They were destroying an entire economic ecosystem. But the real smoking gun came from Amanda's banking contacts. The construction loans were secured by fraudulent electrical assessments that claimed the power line cuts were temporary construction measures. Banks were told the electricity would be restored to commercial grade once construction was complete. If those utility rights reverted to me, the entire development would violate federal lending regulations. The banks could demand immediate full repayment of $18 million in construction loans. That's when I found Gramps' handwritten journals in the workshop attic. His 1988 entry broke. My heart switched on emergency power. Today helped the Yamamoto shop and 2 others get through the outage. That's what neighbors do. The substation was never about our family's independence. It was about community service, helping downstream businesses survive power failures and managing electrical load to protect everyone in the grid. Reading those journals, I realized what Pat had really stolen. It wasn't just land or electricity. It was 35 years of community cooperation that my grandfather had built 1 kilowatt at a time. My engineering analysis confirmed what I'd suspected. Pat's power line cuts were creating a downstream electrical hazard during peak usage. The redirected electricity would overload residential circuits. The original electrical grid had provided natural load balancing for the entire neighborhood, and my substation system was the only way to safely manage community power demand. The timeline pressure was crushing. April storms were predicted to bring the heaviest electrical demand in 5 years. If I waited for the legal system to grind through appeals and federal investigations, natural power failures would happen anyway, potentially causing real property damage. But if I acted now, I could control the timing and intensity. A controlled electrical restoration would demonstrate natural load patterns without endangering anyone while proving that the HOA development violated federal utility law. Standing at those main switches at sunset holding Gramps' journal, the moral clarity hit me like lightning. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoring the natural electrical order that had sustained this community for generations. Pat had systematically destroyed the local business community. Mr. Yamamoto lost his family's century-old manufacturing shop. Susan Torres's ancestral electrical business withered without reliable power. 3 other families were forced to sell generational properties to David's eminent domain schemes. But the federal utility investigators were scheduled to visit next week. Perfect timing. If I could demonstrate natural electrical patterns before their inspection, it would prove the HOA development violated multiple federal laws. The musty smell of old transformer oil and electrical equipment reminded me that this infrastructure was built to last. Gramps had designed it for exactly this moment, when someone would need to stand up for the grid and the community that depended on it. As storm clouds gathered on the horizon, I made the decision that would change everything. Time to honor Gramps' legacy and throw those switches. You don't just restore power without a plan. This wasn't revenge. It was an electrical operation with legal cover, utility, justification, and community support. First, I assembled my team. Amanda Chen coordinated the legal strategy, filing additional federal complaints to ensure maximum media attention when the power restored. Carlos Martinez provided federal cover, guaranteeing that Puke investigators would witness what he called our natural electrical restoration demonstration. Mr. Yamamoto documented 30 years of downstream business damage, providing historical testimony about electrical load patterns that proved the power line cuts were destroying generational manufacturing operations. Susan Torres offered her property as a staging area and brought credibility as the community's most respected longtime business owner. Amanda's legal strategy was brilliant. She filed an emergency utility rights restoration motion, arguing that the substation covenant legally required me to maintain electrical service for downstream businesses. We weren't breaking the law. We were following it. Here's a crucial knowledge nugget: utility rights often supersede residential development rights, especially when you have historical documentation proving prior use. The key is having ironclad paperwork that predates any development claims. My technical preparation was pure master electrician training. I created detailed electrical restoration plans with precise calculations, controlled power up starting at 5 GA, gradual load increase over 6 hours, peak capacity at 11 GA. The electrical demand was calculated to demonstrate natural load patterns without causing equipment damage to anything except Pat's illegal electrical barriers. Safety was paramount. I posted warning signs 48 hours in advance and personally notified the fire department. This wasn't some reckless electrical experiment. It was a carefully controlled demonstration of how power naturally wanted to flow. Amanda contacted utility reporters from the Arizona Republic and local TV stations. Mr. Yamamoto arranged for business owners to witness the commercial electrical restoration. The strategy was simple: control the narrative before Pat could spin it as dangerous. Widower terrorizes neighborhood. Our intelligence network was straight out of an electrical troubleshooting manual. Susan Torres monitored HOA activity through the Business Gossip Network. Never underestimate small business owners with time on their hands. The local diner waitress, who happened to be Carlos's niece, reported on city council closed-door meetings. My union buddy at the Electrical Workers Hall provided surveillance drone support for legal documentation. While I was rebuilding substation controls with modern switching systems, Amanda was waging financial warfare. She contacted insurance companies with evidence of fraudulent applications, arranged for banking regulators to review construction loan documentation, and prepared whistleblower complaints about David's conflicts of interest. The beauty was in the timing. Coordination Weather Service confirmed heavy electrical demand in 48 hours. Amanda scheduled federal utility inspection for the same day. Mr. Yamamoto arranged for the Commerce Commission agent to document downstream benefits, a perfect storm of natural demand, federal oversight, and community support, all converging at exactly the right moment. But I knew Patty's psychology. She always escalated when pressured, so I prepared for her predictable responses. Emergency HOA meeting media smear campaign. Probably a restraining order filed through her corrupt judge friend. Amanda drafted preemptive legal responses to each expected attack. The evidence preservation was crucial. I compiled comprehensive photo documentation of the current electrical setup, recorded video testimony from affected business owners and neighbors, and gathered historical photographs showing original electrical grid and load balancing patterns. Amanda secured everything in federal court filings for legal protection. Safety protocols included coordination with the fire department, communication with downstream residents, and detailed notices posted in English and Spanish. I even created an evacuation plan we wouldn't need just to demonstrate responsible management. The economic warfare was Amanda's specialty. She tipped off state banking regulators about construction loan irregularities, contacted the Arizona Attorney General about insurance fraud evidence, and prepared a civil RICO lawsuit alleging a pattern of racketeering. Here's another knowledge nugget: coordinated regulatory pressure often forces settlement faster than individual lawsuits. When multiple agencies investigate simultaneously, defendants can't fight on all fronts. The smell of electrical equipment, oil, and ozone filled the evening air as I serviced all substation equipment and tested main switches under minimal load. Everything worked perfectly. Gramps had built this system to last. I stocked the workshop with supplies for a potential siege, knowing Pat would try everything to stop me. Amanda filed protective court orders, preventing interference with lawful electrical operations. We established secure communications using commercial-grade radio equipment. As I stood at those controls for the final equipment check, watching storm clouds build on the horizon, everything felt aligned. Weather forecast confirmed heavy electrical demand in 24 hours. Federal investigators would arrive in 18 hours. Pat was scheduled for her morning yoga class appearance in 12 hours, probably planning another attack on my character. The timing was perfect. Dawn tomorrow would bring justice and 35 years of stolen electricity back to where it belonged at 5:02 a.m. with federal agents watching and the morning sun painting the desert orange. I threw the main breaker to 75% capacity. The sound was magnificent, not the violent surge of electrocution, but the gentle hum of electricity returning home. For the first time in 20 months, Desert Ridge businesses began operating with full power, exactly where infrastructure intended. Mr. Yamamoto knelt beside his restored equipment and touched the live electrical panel with tears streaming down his face. "This is the power that ran my father's shop for 50 years, he whispered. Pat's reaction was immediate and predictable. She screamed at the federal agents to arrest the terrorist, her carefully composed yoga instructor demeanor cracking like cheap wire insulation. Puke Agent Sarah Kim calmly explained, "Ma'am, this gentleman has the legal right to operate his utility infrastructure." But Pat was live streaming on Facebook, her voice rising to near hysteria. "He's overloading our electrical systems. This is what happens when we let unstable widowers have weapons. Except the electricity wasn't overloading anything. It was flowing exactly where it belonged in the original electrical grid that her development had illegally interrupted." Local news helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting the substation operation live. The Arizona Republic reporter was interviewing downstream business owners about their restored electrical access when Pat tried to hijack the interview. "This widower is using electrical knowledge to attack civilians," she shrieked. The reporter, clearly confused, asked, "Ma'am, the power is flowing to legitimate businesses. How exactly is this an attack?" You could almost hear Pat's narrative collapsing in real time. David was frantically calling Judge Walsh, screaming into his phone about property values and campaign contributions. "That psycho is destroying millions in development value," he yelled, apparently forgetting that Amanda was recording the conversation from the courthouse steps. "Here's a legal nugget for you. Arizona is a one-party consent state, which means you only need one person's permission to record a phone conversation, and that person can be yourself." The engineering validation was beautiful. Puke Agent Kim measured the electrical load and confirmed it matched historical demand patterns exactly. Carlos Martinez documented everything. This is how electricity flowed naturally before the 2022 power cuts. Federal agencies prioritize natural electrical flow over development convenience, and we were proving that principle in real time. Susan Torres's equipment powered up for the first time in 20 months. 3 downstream businesses reported restored electrical access to their manufacturing systems. The local hardware store owner brought coffee and homemade breakfast burritos to everyone, saying, "My dad's shop ran on this power. This is how it should be." Even some of Pat's supporters began quietly leaving as they realized no homes were actually experiencing power. Outages, turns out, it's hard to maintain righteous indignation when the disaster you're protesting is just electricity flowing where electricity naturally flows. The insurance collapse accelerated when the construction company received a cease and desist order from state investigators. All work stopped on the HOA development pending. The fraud investigation, Pat discovered her own homeowner's insurance might be voided due to fraudulent electrical access claims. The financial house of cards was collapsing faster than a blown transformer, but Pat was not done fighting. She called David in a panic. "Get your trucks down here and cut that power line." David, apparently having learned nothing from the arrest of his security team, sent 2 electrical trucks to accidentally sever the restored power lines. Federal agents immediately arrested the electrical workers for interfering with a federal utility investigation. Turns out interfering with federal utility enforcement is a felony, not a civil matter. The technical success was everything I'd calculated. Electrical load stabilized at optimal levels for business and residential needs. No power outages. In any homes, the grid stayed within its natural capacity exactly as 35 years of load patterns had proven. It would my master electrician training had been perfect. The political fallout was Swift City Councilman Martinez arrived and publicly demanded David's immediate resignation. "This corruption has made our city a laughingstock," he announced to the gathered media. "You're done." Federal investigators expanded their probe to include RICO charges for systematic utility fraud. Carlos told me later, "This is the smoking gun we needed for criminal prosecution." But the sweetest moment came when Pat realized her $3.4 million investment was now worthless without fraudulent electrical access. She screamed at me across the power lines, "You've destroyed everything 40 families." My response was calm, measured, and loud enough for every camera to catch. "No, ma'am. I restored everything your families can buy. Electrical service legally, just like everyone else has." To Pat stormed off, threatening federal lawsuits that would never materialize as Mr. Yamamoto's extended family arrived with homemade sushi. And green tea and Susan Torres brought a traditional blessing ceremony to honor the restored power grid. I realized something important. This was never about revenge. It was about community, the kind Gramps had built 1 kilowatt at a time, one business at a time, one act of electrical generosity at a time. The media narrative had shifted completely. Environmental groups hailed the substation operation. As a model for sustainable electrical restoration, the original widower threatens neighborhood story became community reclaims stolen power. Sometimes the truth flows as naturally as electricity finding its way home. 6 months later, justice flowed as naturally as the restored electrical grid. David Rodriguez pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges and got 4 years In federal prison, Pat faced $12.8 million in civil penalties and filed for bankruptcy faster than electricity. Moving through a superconductor, the construction company paid $18 million in POC fines and got banned from all federal contract work. The HOA dissolved completely, and residents formed a new community association focused on sustainable electrical management instead of suburban tyranny. My property value restored to $1.8 million after the federal utility designation made it more valuable than any suburban development could. The $54,000 settlement from the insurance fraud investigation went to a good cause. I bought Mr. Yamamoto's workshop at tax auction and returned it to him. Debt-free environmental restoration often increases property values more than development ever could. The community transformation was the real victory. The restored electrical grid now attracts sustainable technology, businesses, manufacturing solar panels, battery storage, and electric vehicle charging. Where McMansions were supposed to stand, Susan Torres's shop became a demonstration. Site for renewable energy education and 4 downstream businesses reported their best production years in a decade. The local coffee shop became unofficial headquarters for the Desert Ridge Electrical Cooperative, where business owners and environmentalists planned the next fight against corporate utility theft. The environmental success exceeded every expectation. Protected desert manufacturing operations recovered to pre-cut levels. Within 3 months, the Sierra Club documented 8 business species returning to restored industrial habitat. Arizona Commerce Commission designated the electrical grid as a critical infrastructure corridor ensuring permanent protection. My substation operation became a case study in the Master Electrician Training Manual. Sometimes the best revenge is just doing your job correctly. Personally, I found peace I didn't know I was missing. I renovated Gramps' workshop using sustainable electrical systems, and Jenny moved back from Seattle to help manage our growing renewable energy consulting business. Amanda and I, well, let's just say fighting utility crime together creates a pretty strong connection. The ripple effects spread across Arizona like electricity. Finding new pathways, environmental groups use the Desert Ridge model to challenge illegal power cuts. Statewide federal agencies cite our case in new utility rights enforcement guidelines. I've become an unofficial consultant for communities fighting HOA overreach, and the phone rings constantly. We established the Gramps Sullivan Electrical Scholarship for rural students studying renewable energy engineering. Mr. Yamamoto. His grandson Kenji was the first recipient, and he's now studying electrical engineering at Arizona State University. He wants to protect electrical infrastructure across the Southwest from people like Pat. The annual Power Festival celebrates restoration and community resilience with local food, renewable energy education, and small business support services. We raised money for a utility rights legal defense fund that's already helped 9 other communities fight back against corporate theft. My favorite part, kids learning about solar panels. Where homes were supposed to be built playing with electricity that flows free because a community stood together every Sunday. I visit Gramps' grave and bring a voltage meter reading just like he used to do when he checked the electrical load after equipment upgrades. Thanks, Gramps. I tell him the grid's humming again, just like you said it would. The Legacy Project ensures this victory lasts forever. The Desert Ridge Electrical Trust now owns transmission rights to the entire power grid, creating a permanent buffer zone that prevents future commercial exploitation. No one will ever steal this electricity again. But here's the beautiful twist. Pat's California HOA faced federal RICO prosecution based on our case. 89 families across 4 states filed similar utility rights restoration lawsuits. What started as one electrician's fight became a movement for electrical justice nationwide. From my workshop each evening watching that substation hum exactly where it belongs, I'm reminded that some fights are worth everything. Sometimes you have to cut the power to save the grid, but you don't do it alone. You do it with your community, your neighbors, and people who believe clean electricity belongs to everyone, not just whoever has the best lawyers and the most corrupt city council connections. If you're fighting HOA, overreach, utility destruction, or bureaucratic bullying, don't give up. Document everything. Find allies and remember, The law is on your side when you're protecting infrastructure for future generations. Drop a comment and tell me your HOA nightmare story. I read every single one and reply when I can, because these fights are easier when we support each other. Hit subscribe if you want more stories about communities fighting back against corruption and winning. And remember, your voice matters. Your vote matters, and your electricity matters too. Next week, I'm telling you about the homeowner who discovered her neighbor's perfect smart home was stealing internet from the entire subdivision. So she turned their automation against them in the most beautiful digital revenge you've ever seen. That's a story about a different kind of power and how one network engineer turned the tables on technological theft. Electricity finds a way, justice finds a way, and communities that fight together stay powered together. Desert Ridge flows free, y'all, and it always will.